Wonderful. Thank you very much. It's very nice to meet everybody here. Let me go ahead and I guess share my screen
Yeah.
over here. Wonderful. So very excited to introduce our solution to everyone. The agenda today, as 𝗕𝗏𝘄𝐚 mentioned, is to go through and articulate the challenge that Tonic solves for organizations in testing and development, run through a demonstration of the actual platform itself, which we don't do very often in this kind of setting, and hope that the value it provides is very clear and apparent, and showcase why companies use Tonic and why they operationalize Tonic and the value that they're getting out of that, and answer any questions that folks have at the end. I'm Jake. I'm one of Tonic's founding hires. My role at Tonic is to bring new and cutting-edge technologies in the synthetic data spaces and also generative AI spaces to market in a way that, again, companies can put into rapid use and derive value from. Brightest is one of our partners on that journey, so we're very excited to be here. So what's Tonic? Tonic.ai creates test data that is virtually indistinguishable from your production data because it is in fact synthesized and generated from actual production data sets. We're used to mimic an existing set of data so closely that it feels like the real thing while giving you the tools you need to ensure compliance with rules like GDPR and many others globally. And when you have access to test data that mimics your production environment very closely, your testing becomes significantly more effective. Debugging is expedited. The overall quality of your software is markedly enhanced. Most companies have to do some kind of operation to make testing data. You cannot test your applications on raw production data in any number of industries because you'll run afoul, again, of regulations. Again, like GDPR and several others across Europe, the USA, basically anywhere you have an engineering team or consume data from. Privacy and compliance have teeth. Not to mention the security issues with data proliferation inside of organizations, which I'm not going to preach here about data breaches and whatnot, because I think you folks already get that. The issue is that most testing data is kind of awful. And the problem Tonic is solving is a privacy and utility gap. How do you make testing data less awful? And we believe that privacy and utility exists on a spectrum. It has always been difficult to have private data that retains its usefulness. Companies don't have a lot of good options today. If they're building software that makes use of PII or other kinds of sensitive data, you must be compliant, and that trumps any other consideration, like how good your data is. And there's a lot of solutions out there that can make your data private. Pure play security and compliance tools are somewhat commoditized. You can find a million data masking tools out there, or you can build a script to generate data from scratch pretty easily with open source libraries like Faker or something like that. But there's a catch. Whether you're masking data or creating it from scratch, it's just not your original data anymore. You have lost statistical properties. The data will lack depth. Relationships are broken. Edge cases are lost. And companies have gotten very accustomed to the dysfunction that comes with private test data because, again, privacy has teeth. What are you going to do? You have to do something to be compliant, and utility has always taken a hard back seat. And that causes a whole lot of headaches because the biggest problem that anyone has in software development today is reproducibility. Ask any engineering leader, if you are testing and iterating as you build stuff and the data does not resemble the real thing anymore, what happens when you turn on the lights and start feeding it real-world data? Poor quality, but private data creates the same problem as any other bad data. It leads to unreliable results. It introduces the risk of software failures, incidents in production. It delays how quickly you can reliably publish applications. If you build something and it runs on bad data, it's going to have expensive issues out in the real world. In a test environment, companies want to be able to test in multiple dimensions with variability, with appropriate volume, in a way that reflects the real world. And that's basically what real data or production data is, but you cannot just open up access to production data whenever or to whomever you want. And it wasn't until very recently, with the emergence of a lot of new technologies around synthetic data and even generative AI, that we can begin to focus on preserving the complexity of real production data in a fake output. Even as all those compliance requirements are met, again, for the very real and practical purpose of developing and testing software in regulated markets. Tonic has been contributing to the fields of synthetic data for years. We're also a curator of the latest developments and studies in these spaces, and we're experts in applying them into modern software engineering workflows to improve how software is built. We hold patents in this space. And the key thing I want to emphasize is that this is real. It's in the market right now. It's delivering results. It's good. And big global organizations pay Tonic money for it, and they renew year after year because, again, it works. There are three things I want everyone to focus on as we go through the actual demo today as well. I'll mention them right here, but the key things are, one, how Tonic keeps data consistently de-identified across any medium, like between Oracle and MongoDB and Snowflake, if you really want it. It's how we keep characteristics and statistical properties in the data, in the de-identified output that Tonic generates. And three, it's how we make it available at just the right scale. So you can keep data refreshed with the latest changes from production, or even on a daily basis, if that's what you really wanted. As we go through this, it's also important to emphasize that Tonic is not a science experiment. We have hundreds of productive customers who generate synthetic data on our platform to ensure compliance and security requirements are being met while making sure their engineers are being enabled. Enablement means a lot of different things to different organizations, but the general theme is clear. If you have highly complex, messy data across a lot of different kinds of databases, warehouses, files, etc., do you trust that your test data is going to work the same as production? And with Tonic, the answer is always yes. And before I hop into the platform itself, just one customer here at the bottom, you see eBay. eBay uses Tonic for 8 petabytes of highly sensitive data. This is a Silicon Valley tech giant that's on the clock. They have complex data systems that have evolved over 2 decades. Tonic is used to create test data that reflects the real complexities of very intricate and also very intertwined systems. And to be really transparent, it's ugly data. That's very messy. eBay's data has 2 kinds of complexities. There's ontological complexity. The relationships within the data have grown and gotten more and more convoluted as their applications have grown. 2 decades of development have left things enmeshed in really weird ways. The second complexity is system complexity. The data systems themselves, with data across multiple databases of different types with multiple shards and lots of different tables, are many and they're varied. And using Tonic as the one single tool across all of their data systems has simplified how eBay makes useful test data that's private but coherent and useful. And by the way, eBay is also provisioning that data out to 4,000 engineers globally who all have completely different privacy requirements based on where they're based. So again, very real stuff that's in use today. I'm going to just hop right into the actual demo part of this now. As we go through this, I'm going to be running the demo on Tonic's own hosted cloud. But as you can imagine, with customers that are very worried about things like GDPR and other kinds of regulations, Tonic is typically, especially in Europe, deployed on premises or into a self-hosted environment. Everything is offline. There's no data sharing with us as part of a transformation effort or anything like that. It's usually just deployed by Docker Compose. We have a Helm chart if you're a Kubernetes shop. Tonic connects to some kind of source database. This can be your actual production databases, but more often than not, it'll be a copy of production. It'll be a disaster recovery or something like that. We will carry over things like the schema, constraints like foreign key relationships, and then we'll transform the data in flight from this source into an empty output database. And this output database exists entirely independent of Tonic. Most folks who benefit from Tonic's data don't ever touch the platform. They just use the output database, and you can put this wherever you need it. You can also, if you want to, output into container artifacts instead of an actual output database, which we'll get into more about why that's useful later on. But let's go look at the platform itself. For today's demo, I'm going to be connecting to a Postgres sitting on RDS. But Tonic is pretty database agnostic. We connect to most things that big organizations use as well as little organizations. But today, we're using a Postgres. One of the first things that Tonic does when you connect it to a database for the first time is we're going to look for things that appear to be sensitive in the context of your data. Government ID numbers, email addresses, billing IDs. Here's a bunch of email addresses that we found because the title of the column in this case literally says email. But we'll also look at the data itself. We'll take a sampling. We know that these are what email addresses look like. We'll mark it as sensitive for you, and we'll also make recommendations on how that should be de-identified. You can also automate recommendations in Tonic, especially if you have a catalog, and Tonic will just capture everything and apply simple masking automatically. As a quick example, I'm actually going to unprotect everything in this database very quickly. If you go here, you'll see that Tonic has made some recommendations. We can apply those, and the database is already masked. This is very handy if you're dealing with a database that you're unfamiliar with or something that's quite large. If you're working with a database that you know pretty well, though, you know where everything is. The database view here is a great place to get started. This is your whole schema. These are your tables on the left, your columns on the right. And you can run filtered searches and make changes to the data very rapidly and in bulk. Just by way of example, I'm going to grab everything sensitive that has not yet been protected. And here's a to-do list of things that at a bare minimum must be taken care of before any data is provisioned into a lower environment. I can also search for things I know about, though. The email address from before, again, billing account numbers. Let's look at all first names. And I can begin to bulk apply transformations very quickly, again, just to capture a lot of the lower hanging fruit before we go deeper into utility. So Tonic has a lot of very interesting transformations. We're going to cover a lot of those in just a minute. But for now, I'm going to use a very boring generator. Our name generator is just going to pull names at random from a dictionary that we threw into Tonic. So you can see the original data on the left and the protected output on the right. Where this starts to get kind of interesting is right here. You'll see that we have two Melissas. They're being de-identified at two different output names. That might be fine for first names, depending on your data, but this would get really confusing for unique identifiers or something that you're doing a join on across databases. If you've looked into data masking tools, you've probably heard of the term deterministic masking. And Tonic certainly does that, but deterministic masking doesn't scale. It's also risky. If you know that every time a Melissa, for instance, is going to become, let's say, Rosella, and you have 107 Melissas going to 107 Melissas or Rosellas or whichever, that introduces risk. But you need some things to remain consistently de-identified. So we have a feature, it's called consistency. As you can see here, both Melissas have become Rosella, but we take it a step further. This will mean that Melissa is going to be Rosella, not just on this one column or this one table, or even this Postgres database on RDS that I'm working with. Melissa is going to be Rosella everywhere. Melissa is going to be Rosella between Postgres and Oracle and SQL Server and the DB2 we have hiding in the basement. It'll be Rosella on files that we're pushing through Databricks if we want to. It doesn't matter. The way that this works in Tonic, there's no mapping file. It does not use foreign key relationships. Our consistency feature is done by setting a seed variable at the Tonic installation level. And based on that seed, consistency is done algorithmically across all of the data that Tonic touches. That means that Melissa will be Rosella everywhere if that's what we want. But again, you might not use this on names, but let's say for a patient ID number or a transaction ID number, when you need those things to remain consistently de-identified across the hundreds of databases across an enterprise, this is something only Tonic does. Right now, in this example with consistency, Melissa is also consistent to itself. Melissa's become Rosella's. We can also set consistency to other columns. We can say every time I see patient 123, I want that to become patient 987 and the first name is Rosella and they live in Leuven or something like that. So consistency can also be changed. And again, this works across data sources. It'll even work across environments, like between something on premises and in Azure or on AWS, because it's dependent on that seed variable. So this is the first thing I wanted to show you, how Tonic makes data coherent across lots of different data sources. Now, the Privacy Hub, the database view, these are both good for capturing a lot of things up front. If you're using our UI, Tonic will hold a bunch of records in memory so you can actually see what you're doing to the data before you transform it. And I mentioned in the UI because the UI is actually optional. We're doing this because it's a good way to present Tonic, but everything I'm showing you can be done programmatically through the API. So something to keep in mind. But if you're using the UI, it's really great for the purpose of iteration. And that's helpful because Tonic has a lot of different kinds of transformations. We have a very, very big menu of options to choose from. For gender, I'm going to use a categorical generator. This will shuffle the values, but keep the frequency of those values the same as my source data. For emails, of course, we have things like an email generator, but maybe I need to get a little bit more granular. Maybe I want to use regular expressions because I want to parse the domain of an email address differently than all of the aliases. Perhaps I want to have all of my emails go to, let's set a constant for test.tonic.ai in my test environment. Very easily done. We can also set conditions. Maybe we want to de-identify certain rows, but only if that row meets certain criteria. Perhaps everyone who is below a certain age needs to be de-identified more strictly than someone above a certain age, according to a regulation I'm working with in a particular country or for a particular industry. In the US, HIPAA is very specific about how folks below the age of 18 and above the age of 90 are de-identified. You can also, if you want to, maybe you don't like the fact that Tonic's name generator out of the box is full of very American sounding names. Well, you can also just create your own dictionaries in Tonic if you want to. Maybe we want to have a lot of Belgian last names instead. That's very easily done. So at the end of the day, something like 95% of Tonic's customers are doing all of the column level transformations and basic masking entirely out of the box, and much of that is just done automatically. A lot of the customizations that you make to the generators, like the Belgian last names, can be saved for reuse later across your organization. It's also very handy if you have certain security policies you have to meet. For example, what we did with the birth dates, or talked about with the birth dates earlier. You can set security policies on the way certain kinds of data must be de-identified with Tonic's transformations. The remaining 5% that can't do this out of the box, it's usually something regional or localization related. 𝗕𝗿𝘅, Norway's biggest pension company, started using Tonic a couple of months ago. They're very happy with it. We're going to be doing a case study with them later. And they needed us to make a Norwegian government ID number generator. And Norwegian government IDs are very interesting. They connect to 10 points of information about everybody, where you were born, your birth date, your gender, and things like that. And that had to pass a check in their application. So it took one of Tonic's engineers about 4 hours to put together. It's quite easy when all of the rules are on the Norwegian government's website. But it took 4 hours because at the end of the day, column level transformations are quite easy. This is not one of the 3 things I wanted to show you. Everyone on this call or this webinar, I bet, is very capable of making a column level transformation. It's not hard. What is hard, and the second thing I do want to show you, is how do you keep relationships in the data intact in spite of all of these column level transformations? What does that mean? So I have a very simple manual example of this. There's 3 columns I want to call out here: annual income, largest bill amount, and whether or not someone has a store membership card. And I can guess that these are probably related, right? Folks with higher incomes are going to buy more expensive things in my demo store, so they'll have larger bill amounts on average. And folks who have a store membership card are hopefully spending more than non-members. But if I de-identify these columns individually of one another, that relationship's going to get lost. You'll have folks with higher incomes purchasing less on average or whatever. So how do you keep that intact? Well, for annual income to start, I'm going to use a continuous generator. This will change all of the incomes within a set variance that matches the original. So they're all still 5- and 6-figure incomes as we de-identify this, but more importantly, the overall distribution of values will match my source data. I'm going to use the same one on largest bill amount, but now I'm going to link it to annual income. So now largest bill amount is a function of annual income. I've de-identified both of these columns. I've kept the distribution of values the same as my source data, but I've made sure that relationship is still intact. And these are both numerical columns. Store membership card is not. This is a categorical column. It's a different kind of data. So I'm going to use the categorical generator we used earlier on gender. This will shuffle the existing values, but make sure the ratio or the frequency of those values is the same as my source data. And now I'm going to partition largest bill amount by whether or not someone has the card. And I can do this with dates. I can do this with addresses. I can do this with whatever I want. And the idea is that as you de-identify your data with Tonic, you are modeling it after the original. And if you take this together with the first thing I showed, consistency, you're not just doing this across a couple of columns in a table. You're doing this across all of your data sources, wherever they live inside of your organization, so that your test data is telling a coherent narrative everywhere. You can create this entire mirror universe of all of your production data that is available in a lower environment to an engineering team for them to use, that always follows production on an ongoing basis. So that was the second thing. The third thing I want to show is how do we make that data available? How do we make sure that this is accessible, that engineers have this in very complicated pipelines and where they need it? So all of the work I've been doing has been in 𝗕𝗿ცი𝘄𝗃 workspace. These are all the rules by which I might de-identify all the different tables in my database. But I have a child workspace under it. It follows all of the rules of my golden copy, except for whatever I decide to override. And for overrides, I'm using Tonic's subsetter. Tonic has an extremely powerful subsetting capability. For those who don't know, subsetting is the ability to take a lot of data and make a smaller but referentially intact subset that you can use that's a fraction of the size. So the way it works in Tonic, I can go to different tables and I can say, I just want 5% or 10% of that table. We can also get more specific. You can say, I want all sales above $200, or I want all customers in Antwerp, or I want all transactions that happened in the last 2 weeks. Tonic will grab just the data that you requested. It will then travel your foreign key relationships, whatever was there in the source database, or you can define fake foreign keys inside of Tonic. But we'll travel your foreign key relationships to pull down the minimum number of rows from the minimum number of tables to make sure that we grab just what you requested and the bare minimum of other data to ensure the data set is, again, whole and referentially intact. I'll show what that looks like graphically. I'm working with a very tiny, simple database, but here are all the tables in my database. You can see the lines here for the relationships between them. In my subset, here's everything in my subset, and here's everything outside of it. These two tables are going to be completely removed because we don't need them in the data I requested. For the stuff in my subset, we've gone from 2 million rows down to 250,000 rows. For our vendors table, we've gone from 33 down to a single one, probably because most of my vendors sell things below $200. Practically, what does that mean? Practically, it means I've gone from 350 megs down to just 30. That's a 91% reduction in the size of data. So what our customers do, like eBay, for instance, that we talked about earlier, eBay has 8 petabytes of data. they subset this down in some cases to as small as a gigabyte. I think in some cases less, depending on the use case. But they have lots of different child workspaces with different variations on the subsetter that push data out on an automatic basis to different teams, to different applications, to different test scenarios on a nightly basis, on a weekly basis, in alignment with a CD tool like Jenkins. So Tonic is making sure your data is always refreshed from production as often as you want it to be, and preserving all of the complexity and messiness and noise and values and properties from that original source, but just at the size that you need to actually get your work done. So it's enabling this wonderful contradiction where you are limiting data proliferation across an organization, but you are increasing data access to everybody, so they always have realistic data to work with on an ongoing basis. So those are the three things. There's a lot of stuff that we can cover if folks have questions. How does Tonic, for instance, handle things like JSON or XML blobs in data? How do we handle things like schema changes? When something in our application changes, we have to add new columns or tables to our data. How do we add new virtual foreign keys? What do we want to do if a job fails because of a schema change and we need to alert someone? There's a lot of stuff to go into. I'm happy to answer any questions and go into detail from here, but those are the core three things that we wanted to show today. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jake. Probably there will be some questions from the audience, so you can either, Dean has some in the chat. So hi, Jake, I'm going to ask questions through this way, as where I'm sitting right now is quite noisy. So you refer to Tonic being deployed on premise. I'm assuming I'm an enterprise customer using an enterprise cloud platform like Microsoft Azure, AWS, or even Ubuntu Cloud. I can just deploy Tonic in there, because databases are databases, right? So PS, can you tell me a bit more about the webhooks?
Great. So yes, Tonic can be deployed to all of the different cloud platforms. It's just done through Docker Compose. We have a Helm chart for companies making use of things like Kubernetes. Everything is containerized. So it makes deployment very easy. Also, to answer the question about webhooks. So webhooks in Tonic are a great way to send off alerts and things like that to other kinds of tooling you might have. For instance, we can say that every time a job has failed due to a schema change, if we set up Tonic to fail if there's a schema change, which is something we can deliberately do, we can say that I want to get a Slack notification sent to an accountable person, so that person can come in and apply the appropriate changes to the schema change. And in many cases might just be automatically applying a generator like we showed at the beginning of the demo, to make sure that the data is safe and you're not interrupting your data generation for engineers.
Great.
Good question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jake. I see John is typing. So Jake, if we were looking to de-identify our entire production SAP DB into a queue environment, so a quality environment, would that be doable? We have a lot of third-party developers who can't access our production data, but they're likely to need access to the majority of the whole database.
Yep. So this is actually quite common. We have a lot of customers who have third-party partners that they work with, or maybe just offshore engineering teams in some cases that are very limited on the kinds of work that they're able to provide for the main office or for their client, because they don't have access to realistic production-like data. If you don't have access to real data, what kinds of tasks can you do in a development and testing environment? So they use Tonic to de-identify entire databases, or in many cases just subsets, because there might be a lot of stuff on the database that they don't actually need to do their work, but they will provision out just the right amount of de-identified data to those offshore engineering teams for them to use. We actually have a case study on our website. There's a healthcare payments company, but it's a complicated space to be in. You have to be compliant with financial regulations, also healthcare ones, and they were able to build out an entire offshore engineering team because they can send that team incredibly realistic and relevant data sets that follow the actual production on an ongoing basis. So this is a very common use case.
Great. So John says, I'd be looking to use subsets in the development environment, which Tonic would be great for. So thanks.
Perfect.
Any other questions? So John says, I'm sold. Where do I sign up? So
I'm so glad you asked, because
yeah.
actually, if you'd like, if you go right to our website, you can actually do a free trial right here. So this will be set up instantly. Tonic is hosting it, so be careful about what you connect, but you can try it out. In fact, actually, the same data set I used in our demo today is available right there. So this will be open for 2 weeks. And if you like it and you're okay with a hosted environment, you can actually just pay by credit card and pay as you go if you want to try it out for longer than that. Another thing that might be interesting as well, John, or to anyone else, Tonic has taken a lot of its learnings on databases and structured data, even semi-structured stuff. And we have applied that using a lot of new developments over the last year to unstructured and free text. So if you'd like, also check out Tonic.ai/textual. So this is Tonic's approach to redacting. I think we have a little toy at the bottom that shows this, to redacting and replacing sensitive stuff in free text and replacing it with nearly or mimicked synthetic values, such that you can use this to train, for example, an LLM without exposing private information. So other things that might be fun to explore as well. But again, to just try out Tonic right now, just go to the website and hit start a free trial.
Great. And yeah, looking forward to the next steps.
Thank you all. Very nice to see you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks again, Jake.
Thanks very much.